Today we are diving into Ecclesiastes, and my guess is this is not a book that you have read over a ton of times. It's kind of a weird book. If you're not prepared for it, it reads a little bit odd. And so I'm actually excited that we're diving into this on the podcast because I think there are some helpful insights that you can gain just kind of dealing with Ecclesiastes. It's actually a fantastic book. It's great to read, but it does have some challenges associated with it. The first one being we've been dealing with Proverbs, we've been dealing with Songs of Solomon, we've been reading about Solomon, and so it is easy to assume and associate this book with Solomon. Actually, it even opens up talking about the author, chapter 1, verse 1, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. So it makes sense that people across history have drawn the conclusion that this is Solomon. However, the vast majority of biblical scholars throughout history have not accepted that this is written by Solomon. One of the reasons being the book never actually says that. Song of Solomon says that. There are pieces of Proverbs that say that. Ecclesiastes actually refuses to use the word. And so for face value, David had many sons. There could have been any number of sons of David at that time. Also at one point, it's chapter 1, verse 16, it says, I have acquired great wisdom surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. The problem with that is we believe that at Solomon's point of rule, only David was over Jerusalem before him as far as the Israelites were concerned. So it's odd that there's kind of this plural reference that doesn't seem to fit. So there are many different opinions on who wrote this thing. There is some opinions that the preacher, that's actually the Ecclesiastes comes from kind of the Latin term for the preacher, the teacher, that is kind of a name that covers many people, that there were like editors involved in this, that there were multiple authors involved in this. It does seem like at the very least people assume there were maybe 2 people involved, and at the very most people assume there were maybe 9 people involved. So we're dealing with a pretty unique piece of literature here. You can read quite a bit about the author and the date. The date is also super unknown. It couldn't possibly be before Solomon, but it is most likely much later than Solomon. One thing that is helpful to know is that many early Jewish sources saw this book, Ecclesiastes, as part of the canon. So that means that for many years of early history, many of the Jews that were reading the Bible as it existed understood Ecclesiastes to be part of the Bible. Ecclesiastes is also in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which means at Jesus' time, and actually earlier than Jesus' time, people believed that Ecclesiastes was part of the Bible, and we continue to believe that today. It has come under fire a couple times because it does seem to say different things at different times, and it says some pretty weird things, but that is where it's helpful to understand the context. This book is set up as kind of a question and answer, sort of, where there's a lot of questioning and phrasing going on, where you get the sense of the author, the character, just wrestling with a lot of real life issues and circumstances, much like we would today. If you read over Ecclesiastes, you're going to find thoughts that you've probably had in your life or probably will have in your life at some time. That's what makes Ecclesiastes so interesting. It's also what causes Ecclesiastes to transcend time. Lots of people over many years have been intrigued by this book because it is applicable. All of God's word is applicable, but this book seems particularly applicable to things that people wrestle with, particularly people of faith. And then the final part of the book is going to be kind of the teacher's response to all these questions. And the real key to the book happens at the very end, where the teacher is kind of tying everything up. The final 2 verses. This is chapter 12, verse 13. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment, and with every secret thing, whether good or evil. So it is important to understand this book in complete context. This is a fantastic book that if you're going to quote it, you should have read the whole thing. If you're going to study it, you should commit to reading the whole thing. because one of the main things that people have been contentious with this book, have caused people to be contentious with this book, is that when you pull certain verses out of context, it seems very odd. Like at one point, he is against seeking pleasure and trying to do things that cause you to be happy. And then at another point, he seems to be saying, hey, you should literally do anything that makes you happy. This has been one of the main arguments against the book. But when you understand the tie-up concluding part of the book, you know that the intent of it is to lead us to be faithful to God and trust that he is in control. It's really interesting. You should definitely read the whole thing. It won't take you a long time to read the whole thing. If you don't read it, at least stick around to hear us read it because it is valuable and you should understand everything in context. So some of the opening themes you'll see right away: vanity of vanities. This is chapter 1, verse 2. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Vanity is a word that's going to get used a lot. Basically, it's similar to the way we would use the term futility today. Like everything is futile. Everything that you're doing is going to come to non-existence. The guy here that is writing is really wrestling with what the meaning of life is. And you'll see some very real struggles with, hey, I was super wise, but even when I'm incredibly wise, I'm going to die. I was super rich, but even when I was super rich, I realized that I'm going to die and somebody else is going to take my riches. I've been very poor. I've worked very hard, but even in that, I wasn't satisfied. So there's a lot of wrestling going on here. And the question seems to be, what is the point of our lives? What are we doing with our lives? And I'm guessing that you have probably wrestled with that before, because I've wrestled with that quite a bit at times in my life. Like, what am I doing, and is it having any value? And if those are questions you're wrestling with, Ecclesiastes can give you direction, but you do need to understand the whole book, because if you open up to the wrong page, you're going to think, aha, the Bible says there is no point. And it's kind of this book full of pessimism, but it's proving a point from a pessimistic standpoint. There are other points of the book that tell us to understand God and follow God with everything that we have, but then the opposite perspective is also there. One of the things that's really intriguing to me for the podcast and for the way that the reading plan that we're following, we've split the reading into two pieces, so we're reading Ecclesiastes in 2 separate days. One of the things that sticks out to me is chapter 1, verse 10. Verse 9, actually. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Basically, this idea of just continual things that seem new are actually old. And that's one of the things I've been seeing, particularly in the church today, where people they think they're stumbling into some kind of new teaching or some kind of new understanding of the Bible or of God's commandments. But really, they've stumbled into something that is just super old. A lot of times people fall for heresies that have already been refuted in history past. And I think it is a great reason to study church history as much as you possibly can. Because if you look at church history, first of all, it's pretty well documented. You can look back and actually read original writings of people who were Christians just, 60 to 100 years after Jesus, and you can see what it was like for them to be Christians and what kind of teachings they wrestled with, and you'll start to notice that a lot of early Christians wrestled with a lot of teachings that people wrestle with today. And so there are people that find some kind of goofy new teaching, and it's not really new, it's just actually super old. I can think of people who kind of wrestle with the deity of Jesus. Was he really just a good person, or was he actually God? I can think of people that kind of have like a more holistic, spiritual-minded kind of faith that is not Jesus-centered. It's just more like God really wants us to be good. These are not new concepts. These are very old concepts that the church has dealt with. And that is why it sticks out to me that there's nothing new under the sun. When you think you're believing something new, you're actually believing something incredibly old, something that has already been refuted by faithful fathers of our church. And so I would encourage you to pick up some church history and learn some church history so that you can see when you are being deceived and how that has been dealt with in the past. Overall, those are kind of the opening concepts. I wanted to talk about those a little bit. I wanted you to understand the kind of literature that we're dealing with. It's kind of a argument. It's kind of like a verbal processing kind of book where he's just writing out the questions that he has about life. And ultimately, you need to understand that the resolution of this book is that the best thing for us is to fear God and do what he has commanded us to do. The writer of the book is kind of coming at life as like trying to understand the heart of God, and ultimately what he understands about the heart of God. It is best for man in our meaningless lives to honor God and follow God, because God is always looking over what's happening in the world. He already knows what's happening in the world. He's sovereign. And because he's sovereign, we can trust him and we can have peace in him because he loves us and cares about us and is watching over us as we walk through life. And so we have meaning and value and purpose, even when it feels like we don't. So we'll be back again tomorrow. We'll dive back into the second half of Ecclesiastes. I'm excited for this book. Definitely go pick it up and read it for yourself. It won't take you too long. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks so much for listening to God's Plan, Your Part. If anything stuck out to you, if you have any questions, or if you'd like to receive a Bible, you can email us at godsplanyourpart@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider supporting us through the link in our description. We love that you're on this journey with us, and we hope you have a great day. See you tomorrow.